I'm going to read a quote from Martin Luther King right at the beginning of this video because I think it's very relevant to what we're going to talk about here today, and it goes something like this. I have been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. The Negro's greatest stumbling block in his stride towards freedom is not the Ku Klux Klanner, but the white moderate, who is more devoted to order than justice. Shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. And he wrote that in his letter from Birmingham jail in 1963. Today we're going to talk about why you should never let liberals lead. Let's get started. Okay, so the very first thing that I want to talk about is how liberalism is perfectly made to weaken the message of leftists and completely destroy our movements. And I have a lot of different examples of this, and I'm going to go through a couple of them right now. So without any further ado, let's start with Martin Luther King himself. Now, I want to first start off by saying he was not the leader of the civil rights movement. He was a leader, one of many. He happens to be the only one that we talk about because that's the one person that liberals like to elevate to a higher level than everybody else. Yes, he was an amazing orator. Yes, he was an amazing speaker. Yes, he was amazing at bringing people together and getting them organized and actually having a unifying voice. But he was not the only person that was there. He was joined by a lot of other people, a lot of hardworking individuals that worked every single day to bring the civil rights movement to a reality. Martin Luther King was an amazing guiding light, but he was not an iron fist. He was a good leader, but he was no sort of dictator. He was an excellent speaker, but he wasn't trying to control anybody. That was the amazing thing about having a leader like that and having leadership in that sort of capacity, is that they didn't actually want to be a dictator. He never had any special powers over anybody else outside of his amazing ability to actually relate to people and to bring them together. That was what his amazing talent was, and that's why people looked at him as though he was a guiding light, and that's a good thing. But his message was not of race alone. It was always mixed with class. From the very beginning, he looked at class and race not as though they were separate entities. He looked at them as though they were intertwined, because intrinsically, especially in the United States, they are. They always have been. Martin Luther King didn't preach the unifying liberal message of we should just all get along, and the only thing he ever said wasn't I have a dream. He said a lot more things than that. He had a very well-rounded view of how society worked and how everything came together, not just as individual things that we should take completely out of context from one another, but as an entire organism, as something that works all together as one. He talked about the damaging aspects of the system that we currently live in, and he wanted to see a change in that system. But liberalism morphed and contorted that vision and pacified it and turned it into nothing more than the I have a dream speech. And really, that's the only thing that most people think about when they hear about Martin Luther King or the civil rights movement in general, is that it was really peaceful and black people marched through the streets a couple of times one day and they held signs and poof, all of a sudden they got their rights and everything was good. That's the history that a lot of people are taught. Yes, it was a hard-fought struggle, I'm sure, but it happened so long ago, and we're post-history now. All of that is way in the past, and now everybody is equal. Right? Like I said, they weakened his message, and then they killed him, because he had a message that was unifying and was anti-establishment. It was against the grain. It was against the way that everybody else thought. So they got rid of him. That's basically how that happened. And ever since then, the left has kind of realized that having individual leaders that are leading movements isn't necessarily a good thing. Because if you have that individual leader, well, you might end up with a dead individual leader. But that's the thing about liberalism, is that they want you to have that individual leader. They want you to have that specific person that's there that they can point to and say, this is the guy, this is how they believe, this is what everybody thinks is embodied within this one sole human being, this one man. And that's why they have such a hard time even understanding what it means when a lot of people actually get together and democratically say that they want something without having a leader at all. They just don't simply understand it. They don't have the framework to understand it, because the only way that they can think about manipulating or changing society at all is through a representative, through somebody else that makes the decisions and makes the changes for them. That's why they have such a hard time even understanding concepts like direct democracy and liquid democracy and vote weighing and ranked choice voting and that sort of thing. That's why we have such a massive problem. Like I said, liberalism always weakens the message. And at the end of the day, though a lot of things were gained through the civil rights movement, inevitably they turned it into nothing more than a couple of fanciful poems, maybe a few beautiful murals, and some tourist attractions, and that's it. Like I said, it always weakens the message, and they always destroy movements. The civil rights movement in the 60s itself is a perfect example of this. Black people across the entire country rose up in furious anger against the system, a system that for forever has treated them as second-class citizens, has treated them as though they are not even human beings. So they stood up against that system, and they fought against it tooth and nail so they could actually gain equality and gain some real rights in this racist system. But the unfortunate part is that you can never reform racism out of a racist system. The system will simply move the goalpost from being overtly racist to being inconspicuously racist. And that's exactly what happened with the civil rights movement and Jim Crow and all of those sorts of things. The United States fought in a civil war so they could abolish slavery, only for liberals and the liberal mindset to eventually just allow for prison slaves to increase and increase and increase and become a profitable business. That's how liberalism and free market capitalism handled the idea of slavery. They simply changed slavery from being overt to being inovert, from being directly in your face to being those bad people that we put away, far, far away because they're evil. Not just because of the color of their skin. Oh, no. They're bad people as well, so we need to put them away. And if they happen to also work for slave wages or for nothing at all, that's not slavery. It's punishment that they deserve. And like I was saying a moment ago, during the civil rights movement, they did everything that they possibly could to fight against that system. And just like today, there was property destruction, there was expropriation of goods, there were all kinds of organized groups getting together and doing community self-defense, like the Black Panther Party. There were also other speakers, not just Martin Luther King, who were talking about things that were less than peaceful. Amazing speakers and organizers and wonderful, brilliant minds who brought all kinds of people together, like Malcolm X or Fred Hampton. They all worked extremely hard to build that movement, and they did. And again, they killed them, and they weakened the message. They turned that entire movement from being a black civil rights movement of change to some flowery language, a couple of posters, maybe some beautiful banners, some tourist traps, and they completely eliminated any thought of anything other than peaceful revolt from any of the history books. They don't talk about it. They don't talk about Fred Hampton. They don't talk about Malcolm X. They do talk about Martin Luther King and the peace movement, but they don't talk about all of those other people who worked every single day that were less than peaceful. The ones that used militant tactics to get change immediately. Essentially the people that did the real work that made the changes that needed to be made. If you notice nowadays, Colin Kaepernick, he took a knee quite a few times. He was peaceful. He never did anything out of the ordinary. He never set a single cop car on fire. All he did was kneel during a football game. And that got him ire and hatred and just loathing. Unbelievable, sick, twisted anger was directed upon this man, and all he did was put his knee on the ground during the magic song while the magic cloth waved. And it did nothing. You didn't see the changes after Colin Kaepernick took a knee. You've seen the changes after the entire country got set on fire. You've seen the changes when everybody rose up and said, no more. We are no longer taking this kind of abuse. We are going to stand up against this and fight you. That's when we've seen the change. That's when we've seen everything actually happen. Martin Luther King on his own, his beautiful speeches, his amazing orations, his incredible ability to bring people together, all of that would have amounted to, again, nothing if it wasn't for everyone else involved. But they weakened that message. They weakened it to a message solely and only of peace. That the civil rights movement was 100% a peaceful movement, and it never, ever stepped out of line. Because if it stepped out of line, well, that would have been bad optics. And bad optics are the most important thing. All hail, Grand Emperor and King of all time, optics. Because that is really the only thing that matters to liberals, is the optics. As long as the optics look good for them, it won't be scary, it won't be weird, and they can come to peace with that. It's easier to come to peace with it because they don't have to worry about, the property destruction and looting. When at the same time, we just allowed the largest single transfer of wealth from the bottom to the top that has ever been seen in human history. And not to mention the theft and vandalism the elites did to the native populations that lived here originally. It seems to me like a whole lot of white people walked in, stole the land, and then put up all their own buildings everywhere. If that's not property destruction and looting, I don't, again, know what is. And all of this leads me back to the title of this video and the thing that I was talking about at the very beginning, where I said, never let liberals lead. I'm going to repeat that again because I have to say it over and over and over until it sticks. Never let liberals lead. They will always weaken the message and destroy our movements. They want us to walk off a cliff right alongside them. And I'm not willing to do that. What happens when you let liberals lead? Well, I'll give you a perfect example. Barack, drone strike every single brown person on the face of the earth, Obama. Before Obama was elected, during the George Bush presidency, everybody had had enough of the current system. They were fed up with the wars, the incompetence, the outright racism, and the erosion of every single right that they had through things like the Patriot Act and that sort of thing. The Iraq War during those years was not exactly getting necessarily good press, and a lot of people were really pissed off about it. A lot of people even made songs about it. Fuck, Eminem made a protest song where he basically showed a bunch of people getting into Black Bloc, arming up and marching on the White House. But at the end of the day, say it with me now, the liberals weakened the message. And at the end of the Eminem video, instead of actually doing direct action and changing things, all of the little cartoon Black Bloc Antifa super soldier motherfuckers went in and voted for Obama, because that was the way that we changed things. The only way in a liberal mindset, in a liberal world, in a liberal democracy, that you change anything at all is through signing a little piece of paper that may or may not actually make any difference whatsoever. Especially when you look at things like gerrymandering and voter suppression and all of those sorts of things that have been happening literally since the very inception of the country. Like I was saying a couple of videos ago, the only people in the entire United States that were ever given the ability to vote were white, rich, wealthy, capitalist landowners, and everyone else had to wait in a line, in a little queue, waiting for their turn to get their rights as well. First it was the rich white males, then it was the less rich white males, and then eventually it was black people, and then after that I think the women got it, and then further down the line the gays get it, and maybe eventually we'll allow the transes to get their rights as well. But everybody has to wait in a line, everybody has to wait in a queue, and we have to make sure that we do it through moderation. Nothing too fast. We don't want to jump right into giving everybody their rights. That would be too hectic. It would change things too much. We have to do things slowly. We need a transition period, if you will, before we just go willy-nilly giving people rights everywhere. What are they going to do with those rights? You have no idea. They might abuse those rights. We don't know. They're savages. Anyway, I majorly digress. Getting back to George Bush and Obama, people wanted change. George Bush was looked at as being one of the worst presidents that ever have existed, ever, forever. And I think a lot of people actually forget that, considering a lot of people are trying to do this whole George Bush redemption arc. So liberalism offered them a solution. Vote for Obama. He's our man. He'll make change. He'll do everything right. All you have to do is just sign that little piece of paper and everything will be better. That's how we make a difference. Signing paper. Just mark a little X next to a name and that'll fucking do it for you. There you go. Automatic change. Right there for you. So they did. They all did. In overwhelming numbers, people came out and voted for Obama. Obama turned some red states blue, for fuck's sakes. It was an amazing sweep across the board. He ended up entering into politics with an extreme majority. They had basically control over every single body at one point or another within his administration. They had almost every opportunity, actually, yeah, literally, every opportunity to make any difference that they wanted. They could have signed executive orders like crazy. They could have made changes like Trump every single day, but they didn't, because they didn't want to. What did we end up with? Well, we ended up with 2 wars expanding to 7, the Obama-Biden administration building the cages that they are currently locking immigrant children in. Oh, and also, Barack Obama was known as the deporter-in-chief because he deported more people than any other president, including George Bush, the racist, than any other person before him, and happened to, like I said at the beginning, bomb every single brown person across the entire world because he suspected them of all being terrorists. I think the only thing that people actually praise him for is instituting Obamacare, which is a right-wing plan. It was the Mitt Romney plan, and everybody knows that. So really, the only thing that they praise him for is the one thing that was, moderately okay, but essentially a Republican idea. And like I said at the beginning, they did nothing but weaken the message and give us somebody that was essentially more of a war hawk, more of a Republican, and in some ways with more racist policies than even George Bush had. That's what happens when you give liberals the ability to lead. Essentially, at the end of the day, all they do is put up a bunch of fancy little banners, make a few tourist attractions, and take away any semblance of an actual movement. Never let liberals lead. When they lead, they inevitably just lead us to kinder fascism. It doesn't matter how nice they act. It doesn't matter how flowery their language is. It will inevitably always lead back to authoritarianism. Now, I want to make a distinction before I end this video and say I'm not talking about liberal individuals. They might be okay. They're fine to be in our movements, but as long as they hold liberal beliefs and liberal ideology, they can't lead our movements. They have absolutely no place in leadership roles within socialist movements. They can be there to pad the numbers, but as long as they hold the ideals of capitalism and the ideals of liberalism, they cannot lead. This is a hard lesson that every leftist has learned every single time a socialist revolution has happened. We have to immediately realize that though we might be able to fight alongside liberals in certain situations, they are unable to lead towards an actual solution. The second that somebody uses the reductivist assumption that race and class are somehow divided, that person is not paying attention. They don't have an actual idea of how things work. It's not a logical argument when it's class reductionist, and it's certainly not a logical argument when it's race, gender, sexuality, or any other kind of reductionist. We have to be intersectional, and not in the corrupted liberal way that a lot of people look at it as. Race, class, sexuality, gender, all of these things are essentially speaking about one thing: the oppressed versus the oppressor. That's what we're talking about here. And until we actually are able to get to that point, we are inevitably going to just keep falling into this liberal trap. Say it with me again. Liberalism weakens the message and destroys our movements. Never let liberals lead. 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 Anyway, that's my show. My name is Aaron. Thank you very much for watching. And never let liberals lead. Have a nice day.